Now we come to May 1st, and this is an article by Jim Hoft. Dr. Fauci took buffoonish projections from garbage investigator to crash US economy. Neil Ferguson was intentionally known for his goofball predictions. We now know that the China coronavirus is deadly disease, except for with children and healthy adults. If you're in your 70s or 80s with comorbidities, it can be very deadly. We also know that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx rushed into the Oval Office in early March to warn President Trump of what to expect from the impending pandemic. Fauci and Birx told President Trump and the US could see up to 2 million deaths from coronavirus. Where did the good doctors get their numbers in early March? And why did they push these wild predictions when no country in the world had over 15,000 deaths at the time? Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx got their numbers from Imperial College professor Neil Ferguson. Neil Ferguson has a long record of buffoonish predictions. Ferguson was wrong about bird flu, mad cow disease, swine flu, and now coronavirus. And yet the media and Dr. Fauci took this guy's predictions to push the lockdown that crashed the US economy. Neil Ferguson was wrong on mad cow disease back in 2001. Neil Ferguson has a record of grossly exaggerating his disease predictions, and yet Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx used his numbers to push the current lockdown. Dr. Fauci should have been fired years ago, and now we have 30 million Americans out of work because of his ridiculous assessment, not to mention people in Australia and people all around the world. We're going to be going back in time to March 29th, and this comes from an article from the Daily Mail in the United Kingdom. So we're going back to look at this Professor Neil Ferguson. Here's the article. Professor who predicted 500,000 Britons could die from coronavirus and prompted Boris Johnson to order lockdown, accused of having patchy record on modeling pandemics. Experts have cast doubt on the work of a key scientist whose apocalyptic prediction that the coronavirus will kill 500,000 Britons led Boris Johnson to decide he had to lock down the country. Professor Neil Ferguson, director of the MRC Centre for Global Infectious Disease Analysis at the Imperial College London, authored a report which forecast that terrible death toll if nothing was done to stop the spread of the disease. Even plans to slow the virus, letting around 2/3 of the population catch coronavirus to build up herd immunity, would result in 250,000 deaths according to the Imperial's mathematical model. Professor Ferguson's devastating conclusion led the Prime Minister to perform a drastic U-turn a fortnight ago. Schools were closed and people were told to stay at home. Last week, Professor Ferguson told MPs these measures could see the eventual death toll cut to substantially less than 20,000. Meanwhile, a paper by separate colleagues at the Imperial predicted just 5,700 deaths if the lockdown continued. Now, a rival academic has claimed Professor Ferguson has a patchy record of modeling epidemics, which could have led to hasty ministerial decisions. Professor Michael Thrusfield of Edinburgh University said Professor Ferguson was previously instrumental in modeling that led to the cull of more than 6 million animals during the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001, which left rural Britain economically devastated. But then the Professor Ferguson and his Imperial colleges concluded extensive culling is sadly the only option for controlling the current British epidemic. And so he got it wrong again. Now we jump forward to May 7, and this is an article from Zero Hedge. Computer model that locked down the world turns out to be SHIT code. Zero Hedge, submitted by Mark Jaftovic of Axis of Easy. Here we go. It was an Imperial College computer model that forecast 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2.5 million in the US. Should policymakers pursue a herd mentality approach a la Sweden that influenced them to reverse course and go full lockdown instead? Similar thing happened to us in Australia. The model was produced by a team headed by Neil Ferguson, who recently resigned his post advising the UK government when it surfaced that he himself violating lockdown directives by breaking self-isolation for dalliances with a married woman. We'll go into that a little bit later. The source code behind the model was to be made available to the public, and after numerous delays and excuses in doing so, has finally been posted at GitHub. A code review has been undertaken by an anonymous ex-Google software engineer here, who tells us that GitHub repository code has been heavily massaged by Microsoft engineers and others in an effort to whip the code into shape to safely expose it to the public. Alas, they seem to have failed, and numerous flaws and bugs from the original software persist in the released version. Requests for the unedited version of the original code behind the model has gone unanswered. So now we have some other interesting influences coming in, and notably Microsoft engineers. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Let's read on. The most worrisome outcome of the review is that the code produces non-deterministic outputs. Non-deterministic outputs. Due to bugs, the code can produce very different results given, sorry, my dog's jumping up on me, given, where was I? Let me just start again. Non-deterministic outputs. Due to bugs, the code can produce very different results given identical inputs. They routinely act as if this is unimportant. This problem makes the code unstable for scientific purposes, given that a key part of the scientific method is the ability to replicate results. Without replication, the finding might not be real at all, as the field of philosophy has been finding out to its costs. Even if the original code was released, it's apparent that the same number as in the report 9 might not come out of it. The documentation proffers the realization that iterations of the model should be run, and then differing results averaged together to produce a resultant model. However, any decent piece of software, especially one that is creating a model, should produce the same result if it is fed the same initial data or seed. This code doesn't. The documentation says the model is stochastic. Multiple runs with different seeds should be undertaken to see average behavior. Stochastic, excuse me for my pronunciation of these scientific words, is just a scientific sounding word for random. That's not a problem if the randomness is intentional, pseudo-randomness. In other words, the randomness is derived from a starting seed which is iterated to produce the random numbers. Such randomness is often used in Monte Carlo techniques. It's safe because the seed can be recorded and the same pseudo-random numbers produced from it in the future. Any kid who plays Minecraft is familiar with pseudo-randomness because Minecraft gives you the seeds it uses to generate the random worlds. So by sharing seeds, you can share worlds. Clearly, the documentation wants us to think that, given a starting seed, the model would always produce the same results. Investigation reveals the truth. The code produces critically different results, even for identical starting seeds and parameters. Now that's very, very interesting. Let's read on. In one instance, a team at Edinburgh University attempted to modify the code so that they could store the data in tables that would make it more efficient to load and run. Performance issues aside, simply moving or optimizing where the input data comes from should have no effect on the output of the processing given the same input data. What the Edinburgh team found, however, was this optimization produced a variation in the output. The resulting predictions varied by around 80,000 deaths after 80 days, which is 3 times the total number of UK deaths to date. Edinburgh reported the bug to Imperial College, who dismissed it as a small non-determinism and told them that the problem goes away if you run the code on a single CPU, which the reviewer notes is far away from supercomputing as one can get. Alas, the Edinburgh team found that the software still produced different results if it is run on a single CPU. It shouldn't provide it It shouldn't, provided it was coded properly. Whether the software is run on a single CPU or multi-threaded, the only difference should be the speed at which the output is produced. Given the same input conditions, the output should be the same. It isn't, and the Imperial knew this. Nonetheless, that's how Imperial used the code. They know it breaks when they try and run it faster. It's clear from reading the code that in 2014 Imperial tried to make the code use multiple CPUs to speed it up, but never made it work reliably. This sort of programming is known to be difficult and usually requires senior experienced engineers to get good results. Results that randomly change from run to run are a common consequence of thread safety bugs, more colloquially than those known as Heisenbugs. Another team found that the output varied depending on what type of computer it was run on. In issue number 30, someone reports that the model produces different outputs depending on what kind of computer it's run on, regardless of the number of CPUs. Again, the explanation is that although this new problem will just add to the issues, this isn't a problem running the model in full, as it is stochastic anyway. The response illustrates the burning question: why didn't Imperial College team realize their software was flawed? Because their code is so deeply riddled with similar bugs, and they've struggled so much to fix them, that they got into a habit of simply averaging the results of multiple runs to cover it up, and eventually this behavior became normalized within the team. Most of us are familiar with computing adage, garbage in, garbage out, and the untrained reader may think that that's what's been assessed in this code review. It isn't. What's been asserted is that output is garbage regardless of input. In this case, the output we experience as a result is a worldwide lockdown and shutdown of the global economy, and we don't really know if it was necessary or not because we have no actual data aside from Sweden and severely flawed models. One of the things that I'm thinking of, and I'm not an expert in computers, computer coding, medicine, medical, virology, etc. But one of the things that I'm asking the question, or one of the questions I'm asking in this is, you're running a country, United Kingdom, United States, America, and someone comes to you, a medical officer comes to you and says, this dire prediction is going to start to take place. Why do you, as the leader of that country, with the full resource and power of the government behind you, make a decision based on one person without investigating that one person, their model, and where their model comes from? What happened? What happened to these leaders? Did they not have someone else come in and give them another model? Or didn't they check this person's model? I've got a friend who runs big projects, and when they've got a situation, they will get two different companies to work on the same project, the same model, or the situation that they want advice about separately. And they will come, the two companies will produce two reports. And based on those two reports, they need to find out what they're going to be doing about that situation. Couldn't they even do that? And yet, based on one person's faulty information, and me just looking at newspaper articles, find out that this guy's predictions have been wrong 100% of the time. I found that out. Why did they not find it out? Let's move on. May 11, we got an article from the conservativeview.com, and here it is. Horowitz, bombshell report. Dr. Birx believes the CDC is inflating death numbers by as much as 25%. She's promoting the numbers. Now, what's happening? Let's read. Why is it that long past the peak of the virus, the numbers of deaths continue to skyrocket beyond what the revised government models predicted? On Saturday, the Washington Post reported that Dr. Deborah Birx, sorry, I keep pronouncing her name wrong, Deborah Birx, I think that's how you say it, the White House Coronavirus Task Force Response Administrator, is accusing the CDC of using an antiquated model to track coronavirus deaths that could be responsible for inflating the death numbers by as much as 25%. The Post cites 4 unnamed sources who reported a dispute between Birx and Robert Redfield, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, late Wednesday over the modeling. Quote, "There is nothing from the CDC that I can trust," Birx reportedly said, according to the two of the Post sources. If the 25% inflation number is true, that would place the total deaths closer to 66,000 death figure that the government predicted in April. We need not rely on an off-the-record citation from the Washington Post to know that where there is smoke, there is fire. Birx already publicly admitted last month that the CDC is telling states to code any death of an individual who tests positive for COVID-19 as a coronavirus death, even if it is not proven that the death was caused by COVID-19. The problem is now that we know the virus is so much more widespread than previously thought, and therefore so much less deadly. How can we assume that anyone who merely tests positive for the virus died because of the virus? So that's pretty interesting. Now we go to May 11, and I really I've enjoyed this article. This is fantastic. Here it is. President of Tanzania didn't trust the World Health Organization, so sent samples of sheep, goats, bunny, trees, fruit, car oil for COVID testing. The results are in. Poor goat. That's the headline, and it comes from the Gateway Pundit. Here's the article. The president of Tanzania, John Magufuli, did not trust the World Health Organization on their coronavirus testing. President Magufuli is also a chemist, so the president submitted several samples to the World Health Organization for testing. President Magufuli: "We took samples from goats, we sent samples from sheep, we took samples from pawpaws, we sent samples from car oil, and we took samples from other different things. And we took these samples to the laboratory without them knowing. And we even named all the samples. Like the sample of car oil, we named it Jabil Hamza, 30-year-old male. The results came back negative. When we took a sample from jackfruit, we named it Sarah Samuel, 45-year-old female. The results came back inconclusive. When we took samples from a pawpaw, we named it Elizabeth Ann, 26-year-old female. The results for the pawpaw came back positive that it had that it has corona. That means the liquid from the pawpaw is positive. We took a sample from a bird called Kwa. The results came back positive. We took a sample from a rabbit. The results came back undetermined. We took a sample from a goat, and the results came back positive. We took samples from a sheep, and it came back negative, and so on and so on. And so now you see this, you have taken samples and the results come back positive, and they have corona. That means all pawpaws should be in isolation also. The goat should be in isolation also. Pure genius. Oh, that's classic. And there's so much, and I haven't even gone into the kits that they used to test the coronavirus, and how these kits were sent out from China, and they really, there's some serious stuff hidden in these kits. I'm not even going to go into it now. But here's an article, here's a little bit of a video clip from one of the news shows from Tanzania interviewing a woman that is probably pro-World Health Organization. So here is the clip.
Welcome to the morning call with me, Jerry Bambi. Now, there's been a top and controversial sacking in Tanzania. Head of the country's National Health Laboratory in charge of coronavirus testing was suspended a day after President John Magufuli questioned the accuracy of the test. Magufuli, who was consistently downplayed the effect of the virus, said on Sunday that he had secretly had animals, fruits, and vehicle oil tested at the laboratory. Now, take a listen to some of the things he said he had tested: a papaya, a quail, and a goat. All, he says, had been found to be positive. He cast doubt on the credibility of laboratory equipment and technicians and questioned official data on the pandemic. The president, in fact, called for an investigation into what he suspected to be a dirty game in the laboratory, but did not say where the kits had come from. So the lab director here, Yambura Moremi, has been fired, and a 10-person committee has been formed to investigate the laboratory's operations, including its process of collecting and testing samples. Presently, Tanzania has about 480 COVID-19 cases, including 16 deaths. Now, there's so much to talk about in this story and generally on Tanzania's approach to coronavirus. This morning, we'll take a quick look at the suspension of the lab director. And joining us over the phone from Dar es Salaam to talk about this is a human rights activist, Fatma Karume. Fatma, good to have you with us this morning. Tanzania's lab head is suspended following the COVID-19 positive test carried out on jackfruit, goats, and pawpaw. But the government is not exposing where these kits were imported from. What do you make of this?
My understanding is that there is a set of processes and procedures that are used to test the efficacy of a laboratory. In other words, how the laboratory functions, whether the people who are operating the laboratory are using proper procedures. And my understanding as well is that there is a way of testing the efficacy of a machine that is supposed to give results. And I have never heard of part of the test being that you feed it with samples which the machine is not supposed to be fed with to detect, in order to detect its efficacy. That just can't be right. What the president did was use a completely unscientific approach under the guise of science to test the staff at the laboratory and to test the machine that is being used at the laboratory. The issue is not whether or not the issue is not where this machine came from. That's neither here nor there. The issue is, if you want to test the efficacy of a machine and you want to test the efficacy of a laboratory, then there are processes and procedures that have to be applied. You just don't take samples from jackfruit, for God's sake, and then take it to the laboratory and say, well, you know, the result is indeterminate, so this laboratory are faking results.
Fatma, so you talk about processes here and the efficacy. Let's move on now. The president is promising to import a cure for COVID-19, most likely the touted Malagash remedy. But just yesterday, the WHO warned against such and called what he calls untested drugs. Looks like President Magufuli may not be seeing much opposition to some of his actions in Tanzania.
I think your question suggests that people are not standing up against the president's thoughts. As far as I'm concerned, the opposition have been very articulate with respect to their views on the president's stand during this pandemic. So I don't think Tanzanians are just quiet and saying, well, you know, we are in agreement with you, Mr. President. Tanzanians are very vocal a lot of Tanzanians are very vocal about what they believe. Unfortunately, there is very little one can do other than be vocal and explain that this is not something we support. So, with respect to the president's promise, we shall wait and see. Let's see if he does purchase the medicine from Madagascar, and he does proceed to use our meager resources to purchase an untested medication. And we will see how many people it'll cure, if at all.
Interesting. Fatma, I'd like to thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights with us this morning. Thank you very much. Many thanks indeed.
I love it. I absolutely love it. On May 12th, I got this article also from the Gateway Pundit. And it's Dr. Fauci's 15 deadly mistakes and contradictions, including the devastation of the US economy based on a garbage model. Here's the article. It's hard to believe, but America's top infectious disease doctor Anthony Fauci has been wrong on the coronavirus epidemic every step of the way. Here's a total list of several errors, contradicting statements, and dangerous gaffes by NIAID Director Dr. Tony Fauci. 1. Dr. Fauci says he warned Trump in January that the US was in real trouble, but that is not what he said publicly. In January, Dr. Fauci told Newsmax TV that the United States did not have to worry about the coronavirus and that it was not a major threat. 2. Dr. Fauci warned of an apocalyptic coronavirus pandemic. Then just weeks later, he compared the coronavirus to a bat flu. 3. Dr. Fauci based all of his predictions on the garbage IHME models that were off by millions, and then later told reporters you can't rely on models. 4. On March 20th, Dr. Fauci jumped in and corrected the president during a press briefing on hydrochlorine treatment for coronavirus, saying, "You got to be careful when you say fairly effective. It was never done in a clinical test. It was given to individuals and felt that maybe it worked." Exactly 2 weeks later, hydrochloroquine was deemed the most highly rated treatment for the novel coronavirus in all international polls of more than 6,000 doctors. Number 5, Dr. Fauci pushed these garbage models every step of the way. A month ago, Dr. Fauci claimed 1 million to 2 million Americans would die from coronavirus. Then he said 100,000 to 200,000 Americans will die on the coronavirus. 3 weeks ago, he agreed 81,766 Americans would die from the coronavirus. Then by Wednesday, the expert cut the numbers of deaths to 60,415 projected deaths. 6. On Easter, Dr. Fauci suggested President Trump should have shut down the economy in February when the numbers of known cases in the US was around 100. Fauci later walked back his attacks. 7. Dr. Fauci said cruises were okay on March 9th. That was a huge error. 8. Dr. Fauci said malls, movies, gyms were okay on February 29th. That was another huge mistake. 9. Dr. Fauci was wrong about the first coronavirus death in the country. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and the CDC were off by nearly a month. California officials revealed in April that a patient in Santa Clara died from coronavirus on February 6, not February 29. 10. Dr. Fauci and the CDC missed the millions and millions of US citizens who had already contracted the coronavirus before the draconian lockdowns took place, knowing this could have prevented the economic calamity. 11. On April 15, 2020, Fauci endorses Tinder hookups unbelievably. 12. Dr. Fauci relied on corrupt World Health Organization rules to lock down the United States and destroy the US economy. Meanwhile, this delays the herd immunity that is needed to prevent a future outbreak of this deadly virus. 13. Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx used the Imperial College model to persuade President Trump to lock down the entire US economy. The Imperial model has since been confirmed as a complete fraud. 14. Dr. Fauci warned that Georgia would see a surge in coronavirus cases and deaths by opening the economies too early. He was wrong again. In fact, the opposite happened. And on Tuesday, during testimony, Dr. Fauci told Dr. Rand Paul that opening the schools would not be a good idea. Last week, the Netherlands and Switzerland reopened their schools after finding children were not at risk from coronavirus and are not carriers of the virus. Dr. Fauci continues to be wrong day after day, yet US senators and the media treat him with kid gloves. The doctor put over 20 million Americans out of work based on bogus models, and yet this man, after all his devastation, still has a job. Fauci's mistakes will take years to correct. Only in government can someone with this kind of record still keep his job. Wow. Let's move on. Now we go to May 13 and we come back to Professor Ferguson from an article from Zero Hedge. Now you might wonder why I'm focusing in on his extramarital affair or his affair with this married woman. I want you to look at who these people are, because this is going to give you an idea of what funds them, who funds them, and what their philosophies are. So here's the article from Zero Hedge. May 13, was Professor Panic's flawed computer model virus signaling to his radical climate activist lover, virtue signaling? And I'm going to read the whole article. An analysis of the computer models used by Professor Neil Ferguson to predict that millions would die of COVID-19 models on which Western leaders have based their ongoing lockdowns have been torn to shreds. Some have even gone so far as to suggest that his dire models may have something to do with his married lover being an environmental activist. Neil Ferguson and his married lover Antonia Stotts, a conservative woman, as conservative woman's Janice Davis reports, the source code behind the Ferguson model has finally been made available to the public via GitHub website. Mark E. Jeftovic, in his Access of ESA website, says a code review, and we've read that, has been undertaken by the anonymous ex-Google software engineer here, who tells us GitHub repository code has been heavily massaged by Microsoft engineers and others in an effort to whip the code into shape to safely expose it to the public. So they don't want to show you all the mistakes. Also, they seem to have failed, and numerous flaws and bugs from the original software persisted in the release version. So requests for the unedited version of the original code behind the model have gone unanswered. According to Jeff Tovik, the code produces non-deterministic outputs, which means it will spit out different results for identical inputs, rendering it inappropriate for scientific use. And so the article continues. Now, right down here, another expert, Martin Armstrong, who has a controversial record, also reviews Ferguson's model code and comes to a very similar conclusion. He says that it is such a joke. It is either an outright fraud or it is the most inept piece of programming I've ever seen in my life. This is the most unprofessional operation perhaps in computer science. The entire team should be disbanded and an independent team put in place to review the work of Neil Ferguson. The only reasonable conclusion I can reach is that this has been deliberately used to justify bogus forecast intent for political activism. Now that's what I want you to note. Political activism. What is the goal behind foisting this model onto the government leaders? Let me read further. There seems to have been no independent review of Ferguson's work, which is unimaginable. And that's quoted from the conservative woman. Let's move on in the article. Meanwhile, the conservative woman also points out that Ferguson's now public affair, banging his married lover with strict lockdown measures in place right after he recovered from coronavirus, should also be called into question. That's interesting. His lover, 38-year-old Antonia Stats, is a left-wing activist who works for a US-based organization, Avazar, which promotes global activism on a number of topics, including climate change. The Guardian has called Avazar the globe's largest and most powerful online activist network, and it has a long worldwide following of around 10 million people. Now, this is also why I want you to pay attention to this article and note the names behind these people. Let me read on. It is loosely connected with Bill Gates, and we're going to talk about him later, through the World Economic Forum, which also lists Al Gore and Christine Lagarde on its board. Stats works as a senior campaigner on climate change for the group and is said to be sympathetic towards the aims of Extinction Rebellion. Indirectly, on the surface at least, this ties Ferguson to climate change, a cause that the lockdown has served very well by managing to shut down the world economy, conservative woman. So was it idiocy on the part of Ferguson and his team at Imperial College London? Or is there a more sinister explanation for what went down? And that's where I'm going to in essence, to answer those questions. Government leaders listening to these people, is it just sheer panic and stupidity for not checking up on them? Or is there something more behind this? My personal opinion, I believe there is. There is a global organization behind this promoting this pandemic to achieve certain goals and aims. Let's move on. May 17th, Tanzania opens up. So that is fantastic. The government now lifted the restrictions there, and basically they opened up their country and called for people to come back and start touring their country to try and recover their economy, because the economy is based on a lot on foreign tourism. Let's move on. May 19, also from Zero Hedge. I got these interesting diagrams, and maybe you can go on and just sit and look at these and absorb them for yourself, or pause the video or this podcast, just pause it and just have a look at these slides just for yourself here. COVID-19 deaths in context. How many people die each day? As the COVID-19 pandemic rages on, the media continues to rattle off statistics at full force. However, as visual capitalist Jenny Ross notes, without a frame of reference, numbers such as the death toll can be difficult to interpret. Mortalities attributed to the virus, for example, are often measured in the thousands of people per day globally. But is this number a little or a lot relative to typical causes of death? Today's graphic uses data from our world in data to provide context with the total number of worldwide daily deaths. It also continues how many people will die each day of specific causes. So have a look at that. Just that is interesting and incredible. So worldwide deaths caused by cause. Nearly 150,000 people die per day worldwide, based on the latest comprehensive research published in 2017. Which diseases are the most deadly and how many lives do they take per day? Here's how many people die each day on average, sorted by case. Cardiovascular disease or diseases of the heart and blood vessels are the leading cause of death. However, their prominence is not reflected in our predictions of death nor in the media. While the death toll for HIV/AIDS peaked in 2004, it still affects many people today. The disease causes over 2,600 daily deaths on average. Interestingly, terrorism and natural diseases cause very few deaths in relation to other causes. That said, the number can vary from day to day and year to year depending on the severity of each individual instance. So that's quite an interesting table there as well. Now, this is an interesting statistic, and it's from May 19, and it's from ABC News Australia. Australia's coronavirus death tally hits 100 after a woman dies in New South Wales nursing home Newmarch House. So 100. Our economy gets shut down. That's interesting. So let me read the article. Most of the coronavirus deaths in Australia have been of people aged 70 or older, and almost half of the national total is from New South Wales, Reuters. Coronavirus is claimed as 100th victim in Australia, with a 93-year-old woman dying in Newmarch House in Sydney. The first case of coronavirus 19 was confirmed on January 25, 3 in New South Wales and 1 in Victoria, and on February 27, Prime Minister Scott Morrison activated the government's emergency response plan. 4 days later, the first person in Australia died from coronavirus, 78-year-old Perth man James Kwan, who had contracted the virus on board the Diamond Princess. By April 1st, 20 people had died, and less than 2 months later, the tally had risen to 100, with death of Alice Bacon on Tuesday confirmed by Anglicare, which runs the Newmarch House. This is an interesting quote, and for the life of me, I don't know why I did not keep where I got it from. It's possibly from the same article that I quoted with ABC News. So here's the quote. We are fast approaching the stage of ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while citizens may act only by permission, which is the stage of the darkest periods of human history, the stage of rule by brute force. Ayn Rand, Capitalism, the Unknown Index, the Unknown Ideal Appendix, The Nature of Government, 1967. Wow. We are no longer fast approaching the state of ultimate inversion. We have arrived. It is the stage of which every would-be dictator dreams, where his whims are absolute and everything everyone else says, does, or thinks must comply with those whims, even impossible though it would be when they are contradictory. Science is anti-whim. Nature, as Francis Bacon observed, to be commanded must be obeyed. Nothing illustrates the ultimate inversion of the official coronavirus response better than its leaders' assault on science in the name of their science. And have a look at this diagram. You are more likely to die by a car than by COVID. Look at that. Odds of dying. And just pause and just have a look at that. Wow. Risk of dying of COVID-19 coronavirus. 1 in 13,000. Risk of dying if you're under 65 and you don't have dark skin, low vitamin D level, and you are not confined indoors like nursing home patients, and you aren't taking immune suppressant drugs, 1% risk. Deduct 99% of deaths equals 902 remaining. Deaths among 328,000 equals 0.0000027, or almost 3 in 1 million, 1 in 333,000. So that begins to put things into perspective when the media begins to hype things up, and you start looking at various agendas, and you're looking at the forces behind those agendas. All you have to do is take a step back, stop, and say, let me look at all things around about me and find out. And having a look at the death rate of this coronavirus to the death rates in other areas, or causes of death in other areas, it really puts a perspective on this, and you have to ask yourself the question, or you need to begin to ask yourself the question, with the prediction rates being so high and the actual rates being so low, what is going on? Are they absolutely stupid and incompetent? Or is there an agenda behind this? So in light of looking at figures, let's jump to today, the day I'm recording, which is the 5th of June 2020, and these are the figures of COVID in Australia. So 7,246 people have been confirmed today. There have been 103 people who have died, 6,668 people have recovered, and looks like over 1.5 million have been tested. And we basically destroyed, or hopefully we haven't, but destroyed the economy. Thousands of jobs, thousands of businesses, because we listen to faulty models. We listen to scientists who have an agenda, who are controlled by organizations that have an agenda. And yet still today, for example, in our state, we are still under lockdown restrictions, although they are being lifted progressively. We're still under lockdown restrictions in certain fields. We can't travel to New South Wales, etc. And I'm not fully conversant with what the restrictions are, or the lifting, where we're at this particular point, but they are still in place, many of them. And yet to date, in the whole of Australia, 103 people, and that is a tragedy. 103 people have gone into eternity. And depending on their decision with regards to who Jesus is to them, they will spend eternity with him in heaven, or they will spend the rest of eternity with Satan in the lake of fire. And that is a tragedy. But aside from that, what agenda has been pushed upon us? Whose agenda has been pushed upon us? And what fear has been created by the media? And yet more people die of other things on a daily basis than of this virus. So here is a professor. I got the article from Zero Hedge, and then I went in and I researched where he gave the article, and here is a clip of this professor having a chat with regards to questioning Fauci's model. So here we go.
In the Washington Post with the title, Moderna's claim of favorable results in its vaccine trial is an example of publication by press release. He joins us now. Dr. Hazeltine, thanks so much for joining us. I said the word data at the top of that intro. Your criticism is that there was not sufficient data in their release, and because of that, the market was able to applaud the results perhaps more than they should have done.
I would say several things about the announcement. It was premature. Only 8 people had been studied. It was not impressive, and it was opaque. If a CFO had tried to get away with the same kind of announcement, it would have been greeted by derision and possibly by investigation.
But isn't the point that some of these companies, Doctor, are trying to get these announcements out on purpose as fast as they possibly can for the benefit of public health, for the benefit of plans to reopen economies, for the benefit of trying to get, say, treatment information out there, and vaccine goes along with that too? I mean, we're in a pandemic where, you know, we have people in the emergency rooms fighting this right now.
The question is not that we're not an emergency. We know we're an emergency. But in an emergency, it's even more important to be clear about what you know and what you don't know. There is a process which is vastly accelerated. The moment the data is put together, the moment it can be presented, it's on the internet for free. Everybody can see it. Moderna did not follow that. We don't know what happened. You don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Nobody, maybe a few people in their company know what happened. We can't see that data. And again, let me just take the financial example. Even in an emergency, that's not warranted. There are many processes that we have put in place that allow global sharing of data. That's not the issue. The issue is, do we know what happened? And the answer is, we don't.
Dr. Hazeltine, has this type of practice become more of a norm in recent months, let's say, or even recent years? Do you think Moderna was acting, even if not ideally in your view, acting in line with how others do this, or did they purposefully, do you think, release this information without all the full details?
This is abnormal. I hope it's not becoming the new normal. This is a great exception to what's happened before. Rapid publication, even before the manuscript is reviewed or accepted, is now part of the practice in this time of emergency. That, I believe, is good because everybody can look at the information. A doctor can make a decision. Let's take remdesivir. We still haven't seen the data for that. It was announced that it worked, sort of. It didn't save any lives. It let people get out of the hospital who might have gotten out everywhere anyway, maybe a day or two earlier, a few days earlier. But we don't know it really did. We can't see the data. And what is a doctor going to do? Is he going to use the drug? When a paper came out the very same day that says it doesn't save lives, it doesn't have any effect on the virus, what is the doctor on the front lines going to do? Are people battling over a drug that doesn't work? We don't know because we don't see the data. That is abnormal and it's wrong. You wouldn't accept that for
I have two things on that.
You wouldn't accept it for this.
I mean, are you questioning Dr. Fauci, who also came out and said that this was encouraging news and, you know, stood in front of this NIH study? He's our foremost infectious disease expert in this country. And the other thing is the FDA approved it. So, I mean, I assume the FDA had to at least have seen the data underlying those claims.
It is not approved by the FDA. That is not an approved drug. It is recommended.
They suggested it for emergency use.
That's right, and we don't have the data for that. And am I questioning Dr. Fauci, who I've worked with for many, many years and I regard as a close friend? Whether he shaded what should have been done, I think is a question. He's obviously under enormous pressure for positive results, but I think it was not the right thing to do if you can't see the data. It's 21 or 22 days, and we still haven't seen the data. How do we know it works? When another manuscript that came out that was published in a very prestigious journal that says it doesn't work. So what is the doctor going to do?
Dr. Hazeltine, I just want to come back, if we step away from Moderna as vaccine and remdesivir specifically, where do you stand on the likelihood and the timeline for when we will have an effective vaccine, whoever it is that ends up manufacturing it?
You know, let me say the first question is if we're going to have an effective vaccine. We don't know. People have tried to make effective vaccines for coronaviruses, the type of virus this disease is, for some time. They've not yet been successful. Some of the data that we've seen, one paper suggests with a killed virus vaccine, you can get protection. Another paper from a group in England, in Oxford, when you actually got to see the data, none of their monkeys that were vaccinated were in fact protected. They all had a nasal infection. Yes, they didn't have as much virus in their lungs, but they still had a nasal infection. 100% of the vaccinated monkeys got infected. So we don't know the answer. I can't answer that question. And we don't know the answer of if, we can't tell you when.
Dr. Hazeltine, we appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now that clip was May 20th. So let's move on to May 21st. And this comes from the Washington Times. Australian researchers see virus design manipulation. A forthcoming Australian scientific study concludes that the coronavirus causing the global pandemic contains certain properties suggesting it was manipulated in a Chinese laboratory and was not the result of a natural occurrence. 5 scientists who have conducted the study discovered an unusual ability of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, as the pathogen behind COVID-19 is called, to easily infect humans. The scientists said there is no sign so far that the virus can be found in other animals, including bats or exotic wildlife sold for fresh meat at the market in the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the virus was first identified and where China maintains a major laboratory studying viruses. The preliminary report of the study, which is now being peer-reviewed, is based on computer modeling of the virus' ability to infect various animals, including humans. It was published May 13 on the Cornell University website arxiv.org, which is used for discussion of pre-publication papers. Nikolai Petrovsky, the lead researcher, said his team suspects human manipulation in Wuhan because of the unmatched ability of the virus protruding spike to infect human cells. The virus binding strength from human cells far exceeds similar properties for infecting other animals, he said in a statement on the forthcoming report. This, plus the fact that no corresponding virus has been found to exist in nature, leads to the possibility that COVID-19 is a human-created virus, said Mr. Petrovsky, a professor at the College of Medicine and Public Health at Flinders University in Adelaide, Australia. It is therefore entirely plausible that the virus was created in a biosecurity facility in Wuhan by a selection of cells expressing human ACE2, a laboratory that was known to be cultivating exotic bat coronaviruses at the time. Moving down the article, highly adapted pathogen. The forthcoming study, however, concludes that the binding energy of the virus spike protein, the crown-like protrusions surrounding the surface of the round microbe, is highest for human and greatest than all other species tested, including bats, which have been widely targeted as the likely original source. This indicates that SARS-CoV-2 is a highly adapted human pathogen, the Australian report said. The team analyzed spike protein binding the virus on a range of other animals, including pangolins, civets, mice, hamsters, cats, dogs, snakes, horses, tigers, and cows. Overall, the data indicates that SARS-CoV-2 is uniquely adapted to infect humans, raising important questions as to whether it arose in nature by a rare chance event or whether its origins might lie elsewhere, the report said. Jonathan J. Huey, please excuse me for saying your name wrong, a research assistant professor of neurobiology at the University of Pittsburgh, said he agrees with the Australian findings. Understanding the exact origin of this virus is vital to ensure that all scientific and medical data are interpreted correctly by policymakers and healthcare professionals alike, Mr. Coe said. However, he said debate on the laboratory origin of the virus has been stymied by scientists opposed to even considering the possibility. Several scientists with obvious conflicts of interest have been permitted to go on the record denying that it would possibly be generate such a virus in the laboratory by stating specifically that the sequence of SARS-CoV-2 would never have been chosen by any gene jockey, he said in an email. Both of these denials are not genuine scientific rebuttals, but rather semantic pseudo-denials formulated by some of those most closely tied, now this is it here, to funding of those gain-of-function research lines. Now remember what Professor Boyle said in the previous clip of the interviews. Gain-of-function research is laboratory work to increase the ability of pathogens to cause disease. It is carried out to study pandemics and how to respond to them. Let's move on in the article. The Australian study is the second scientific paper to suggest laboratory manipulation played a part. A group of Indian scientists published a paper on January 31st that found the new coronavirus contained 4 insertions to the spike protein that are unique to SARS-CoV-2 and not found in other coronaviruses. The features, they said, are similar to those found in the virus known as HIV. Those scientists concluded that similar structures are unlikely to be fortuitous in nature. The Indian paper was withdrawn under pressure from China, but the scientists involved refused to repudiate their research and promised to publish their findings eventually. Mr. Petrovsky, who is also research director for Vaccine Pty Limited, a biotechnological company based in Bedford Park, South Australia, said the source of the virus remains a vitally important question. While COVID-19 has close similarities to SARS and other bat viruses, no natural viruses matching to COVID-19 have been found in nature despite an intense search to find its origins, he said. This raises the very legitimate question of whether the COVID-19 virus might be the result of human intervention. That is an interesting article. Now here's another article from the Gateway Pundit on May 21st. We need better experts. CDC admits coronavirus mortality ratio is similar to 1957-1958 flu pandemic where no lockdown was needed. So just the highlights of the article here. The CDC admitted this week that the mortality ratio for the COVID-19 virus is similar to the mortality rate of the 1957-1958 flu pandemic. And we spoke to you about that previously with a previous article concerning Elvis and Ike. CDC 5/12/20, and that's their web page, concedes infection fatality ratio IFR of COVID-19 Wuhan flu is 0.27%. Okay, and that's almost equal to the 1957-1958 pandemic of the H2N2 flu in the United States, which was 0.26%, and there were no lockdowns there. So in 1957-58, it caused 1 to 2 million deaths worldwide. From 77,000 to 116,000 people died in the US, and the US population in 57 was 177 million. The coronavirus has reportedly killed 97,184 Americans, most of them seniors who have comorbidity issues. And globally, the virus has killed 337,992, as I previously indicated, of that 103 from Australia. The seasonal flu this year is estimated to have killed 24 to 62,000 Americans. The World Health Organization estimates 290 to 650,000 people die from flu each year across the globe. And the economies of the world have not been closed or destroyed because of flu. So again, I'm putting the question to the forefront of your mind. What is behind this? On May 22, from the blaze.com news, CDC admits to giving misleading COVID-19 testing data. Several states have been making the same mistake. It's apples to oranges. This comes from Phil Shiver. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention admitted that it is combining viral and antibody tests when reporting its overall testing totals, a decision which scientists say paints an inaccurate picture of the state of the pandemic in America. The test mix was first reported by NPR WRL station in Miami after a nationwide analysis found major discrepancies between state reports on testing and CDC reports. It's apples to oranges. The two tests measured two different things, said Mary Jo Trepka, a professor of epidemiology at Florida International University. What exactly is the mistake? Viral tests, also known as PCR tests due to a process known as polymerism chain reaction, are administered to discover whether someone has an acute current infection of COVID-19. These tests are what public officials are referencing when confirmed cases are reported. Antibody or serology tests, on the other hand, measure whether or not an individual might have come into contact with COVID-19 in the past. They do this by testing an individual's blood to see if their immune system has developed antibodies in response to the disease. CDC guidelines note that antibody tests are adequate for research but not for individual use, in other words, to test people who want to know if they have been previously infected. Why does it matter? By conflating the results of the two tests, the CDC, along with several states, have been making it more difficult to understand the measuring of positive and negative tests. The viral testing is to understand how many people are getting infected, while antibody testing is looking in the rearview mirror. The two tests are totally different signals. JHA added in the Atlantic report, he added that combining the results makes the date uninterpretable. The conflation also makes it more difficult to judge whether the country or an individual state has improved in the viral testing capacity, since results may be buffeted by the inclusion of antibody tests. If they are not reporting the numbers of real-time PCR tests plus the number of serology tests together, it's hard to interpret and hard to know how many people are actually screened for an accurate infection, added Trepka. It's important to remember that the test results do not merely amount to technical error, but have wide-ranging consequences for state and local leaders who make decisions on when to reopen their jurisdiction based on the data. Very, very interesting. So we move on a couple of days to 24th of May, and here's an article from the townhall.com. Does this CDC study deliver the knockout blow in the COVID lockdown debate? And down in the article it says this, and I'm going to read now. The CDC just came out with a report that should be earth-shattering to the narrative of the political class, yet it will go into the thick pile of vital data and information about the virus that is not going out to the public. First, for the first time, the CDC has attempted to offer a real estimate of the overall death rate of the COVID-19, and under its most likely scenario, the number is 0.26%. Officials estimate a 0.04% fatality rate among those who are symptomatic and project a 35% rate of asymptomatic cases among those infected, which drops the overall infection fatality rate, IFR, to just 0.26%, almost exactly where Stanford researchers pegged it a month ago. Until now, we have been ridiculed for thinking the death rate was that low, as opposed to the 3.4% estimate of the World Health Organization, which helped drive the panic and the lockdowns. Now the CDC is agreeing to the lower rate in plain ink. Plus, ultimately, we might find out that the IFR is even lower because numerous studies and hard counts of confined populations have shown a much higher percentage of asymptomatic cases. Simply adjusting for a 50% asymptomatic rate would drop their fatality rate to fatality rate, not fertility rate, fatality rate to 0.2%. Exactly the rate of fatality Dr. John Ioannidis of Stanford University projected. May 25. Now this comes from WND.com, but it's originally from the Western Journal by a gentleman called C. Douglas Golden. CDC estimates put COVID fatality rate at 0.26%, over 13 times lower than initially World Health Organization claim. So very similar article confirming what I previously read to you. It's a number that informed so many of our public policy decisions regarding COVID-19. 3.4%. On March 3, in the early days of the coronavirus pandemic, World Health Organization Director General Tedros made a remark during a media briefing that guided how we viewed the threat posed by the novel coronavirus. While many people globally have built up immunity to seasonal flu strains, COVID-19 is a new virus to which no one has immunity. This means more people are susceptible to infection and some will suffer severe diseases, Tedros said during the briefing. Now, just on a note, I've tried to find the briefing, but I cannot, the life of me, find that briefing and insert that clip for you. Globally, about 3.4% of reported COVID-19 cases have died. By comparison, seasonal flu generally kills far fewer than 1% of those infected. Now, was this based on incomplete information? Of course. At some level, it's difficult to blame individuals working from a very limited data set. On the other hand, that limited data set influenced how we approach the disease, and it turns out that if the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention current best estimate of COVID-19 death rate is accurate, it's 13 times lower than the initial World Health Organization claim. According to statistics based on data received by the CDC prior to 29th of April 2020, the death rate from COVID could be as low as 0.26%. The numbers are based on the newest of 5 COVID-19 pandemic planning scenarios that are designed to help inform decisions by modelers and public health officials who utilize mathematical modeling, the CDC said. Now I find this clip interesting. Just listen to Fox News, John Roberts, prior to a White House. I've been reading too much. A White House press briefing. Here's the clip.
What's up, Barry?
All right, man.
Where do you go, baby?
You can take out the mask, Doug. The case fatality rate's like 0.1 to 0.3 according to
Is it really? That's reassuring.
USC.
Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway.
USC and LA County Public Health come out with a study. They found that there are 7,000 cases in California, but they really believe that there are anywhere from 221,000 to 442,000 people who were infected.
Really?
Yeah.
So that makes it 0.1 to 0.3? Does a study to come out with? Or?
Yeah, just give it to that. So it suggests the case fatality rate is about 10. It seems.
Wow.
Which puts you right in line with the flu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what it is.
So it was a hoax.
I don't think it was a hoax.
The final article I want to give to you in my research, and as I've said to you previously, the stuff just keeps unfolding more and more, comes from May 26th. The most important coronavirus statistic: 42% of US deaths are from 0.6% of the population. And this comes from Forbes.com. Americans are vigorously debating the merits of continuing to lock down the US economy to prevent the spread of COVID-19. A single statistic may hold the key to resolving this debate: the astounding share of deaths occurring in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities, the number one COVID problem. 2.1 million Americans represent 0.62% of the US population reside in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Nursing homes are residences for seniors needing help with activities of daily living such as taking a shower or getting dressed, who also require 24/7 medical supervision. Assisted living facilities are designed for seniors who need help with activities of daily living but don't require full-time on-site medical supervision. According to an analysis that George Gervin and I conducted for the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, as of May 22, in the 41 states that currently report such figures, an astounding 42% of all COVID-19 deaths have taken place in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Long-term care facilities account for 42% of all US COVID-19 deaths, but only 0.6% of the US population. That is astounding. Among the states reporting their death tolls, 42% of COVID deaths have taken place in long-term care facilities. We also estimate that the share of 42% of the full US population, based on incorporating the demographics of the non-reporting states. Let that sink in. 42% of all COVID-19 deaths are taking place in facilities that house 0.62% of the population. And 42% could be an undercount. States like New York exclude their nursing home death tallies through those who die in hospital, even if they were originally infected in the assisted living facilities. Outside of New York, more than half of all deaths of COVID-19 are residents in long-term care facilities. All right. Now, I've done a lot of reading and I've given you a lot of information. And I feel it's important because it gives you an overall perspective of the development of the story as it's progressed from last October until today. And what you will find is the more what people would call the more fake news websites that started promoting things like this is man-made, this is a bioweapon, those and people who were ridiculing them, those facts are now being manifest and are now being reported in the mainstream media, because it's just the truth is just becoming more and more evident to people, and they can't actually stop trying to promote their agenda or their story. So what you've seen so far and what I've shown you so far is the origin, which I believe is a man-made chimera virus. Number two, what you've seen so far, and I believe, is that the figures that these people have given are false and have caused a panic around the world that could possibly collapse the economies of the West, which will have far more serious consequences with regards to death than this coronavirus. The next session that we're going to be going into, I'm going to be looking at, let me just call it up here. I'm going to be looking at what I think are the players behind the doctors that you are seeing in front. So who's behind Neil Ferguson's? Who's behind the Dr. Fauci's? Who's behind the Dr. Birx's? Sorry, Dr. Birx. Who's behind them? I'm yet to discover who's behind the Australian doctors. Who's behind the people that have given the politicians the information and put such pressure on these politicians that they've shut down the economies of the world on falsehoods? And so in the next session, we're going to be looking at the organizations coming in behind and their war games in actually preparing their organizations for the release of this virus. So that's all for now. Thank you. God bless.